Good morning, all. Good morning, all. Today, I just wanted to drop in. My name is and I am Wise Joyful Company Consulting, and I am an author and a speaker. And I just wanted to talk today. I am focusing in this time on grief, and I am traveling the grief highway even more than when we talk about grief for death. This just happens to be the season of September where we are looking at 911. And I wanted today to just focus on grief as a way of looking at how we are redeemed. And so that leads right into the fact that I have uh, been the author for three books. And my first book was really talking about grief as well as how we would deal with it. It's called Masita's Touch, Grace for the Grief. And it just happens to be written after the death of my niece, who is Masita, and her 7 month pregnancy and her child that was named Chuck. We were going to call him Chuck. And just knowing that we deal with grief so much. This week has been just filled with people asking for prayer on behalf of the bereaved families and friends of those that they love so much. And so I wanted to pay attention to the fact that there is grace for the grief. In this book, I really talked about this the attributes of a family member and how we use grace in order to deal with grief. So my challenge now, as I'm looking at this focus, here we are, uh, uh, 9 years, 10 years from her death and the publishing of this book. I am looking also now at how grief travels across so many highways, across so many places and pastures, and just stops in so many different areas. And one of the things that I really wanted to look at is how we communicate, how we look at death in different ways, sometimes in different communities. I've attended funerals. I have been the eulogist for funerals. I have been giving words of comfort on funeral in the 20 years of my ministry. So I know that I always say when I look out into what we call our front row, first row, where you are looking into the family, the most immediate family is usually on that row, and you're looking into their faces and thinking about how they are dealing with all of their loved ones, their memories. And since this is a time also that I'm dealing with the memory of my daughter who died on September the 1st and was born on September the 12th of 1 year. And it all that those 12 days are always very different in how I deal with the memories and even how I deal with the grief. But I do know that the communication that goes forth when you are not only listening to those who are grieving, but also speaking words of comfort, that sometimes that's very different. So today I just really wanted to talk about how different places, and different positions that you will deal with grief. I was in a grocery store and the lady was lamenting about the cost of different things and how she really started looking at prices and things like that. And out of the conversation came the fact that she had recently lost a family member that sometimes helped her with the same things that she was trying to do today. And so it was her way of reaching out to maybe just reinforce her on self with dealing with these situations. But that's one of the things that we have to think about. Now, one of my second book was actually a devotional, and I share that with you. It's Skies of Myself, Soul, and Spirit, Psalms for Delight and Devotion. And that's exactly what I use it for. Sometimes when there is something that I'm not ready to receive in the manner of how people are saying things or how things are going, even if it's just, I've been recently dealing with grace over grief of bills, of cost of care, because I am a share carer and the primary caregiver for my husband, who is a survivor of more than 11 diagnoses, medical diagnoses. And so there, with those, all of those diagnoses come the medications and also the cost. So I'm dealing with grief from that standpoint, and I use that. Sometimes I say, okay, self, you've had enough pity. So it's now time to really dig into your soul and your spirit. And that's one way that I use that book. So the reason I say that is because we all have these ways of dealing with grief. As I said, my daughter's death, it is now 4 years. And I still have things that when I pick them up that belong to her, I still have a special memory or a certain memory. And that is one of the reasons that I wanted to say, do not do not try to change someone's way of dealing with grief. You're not that big and you're not God. And he did not send you an assignment to deal with that. So be very careful and use your listening ministry to deal with some persons with as they are dealing with grief. The last thing that I really wanted to hit on was the last book, our recent book that came out in September. And I've shared this before, but I'll share the title before. It's Redeeming Grace. Look how far God has brought us. So as I am looking at how to close this video, knowing that today we are all reminded of the 911 time, knowing that on this day, my father was born, and we are now celebrating his 88th anniversary today of his birth, and his death was in 2007. So sometimes those memories will just flood so much that you just can't deal with another statement about grief or another person talking about all the things that go and come with dealing with grief. So that's one of the reasons that I explained that my company is called Wise Joyful Company. And when I started the company, my name is Wyvonia, and most people call me Dr. Y or Minister Y or Mama Y or Graham Y. But the joyful came with that because I wanted it is one of my coverings to deal with grief. And it's one of the things that I suggest as we are looking at how we are going to move forward. I always suggest if you can find joy, even if it's a 30-second joy period, sometimes that helps you bridge over the idea that there is a hard situation that you're dealing with, a hard conversation that you're trying to get in, or just a hard memory that you need to soften. So as I'm looking at how we're dealing with all of these things, one of my goals today was to make sure that I talked about these three things: the redeeming grace, the grace for the grief, and also how we could use our Psalms for self, soul, and spirit to deal with all of the things that we will deal with today. I thank you for the opportunity just to speak to you about these situations, and I do hope that you will be able to glean something for your day to make it as joyful. And please join Wise Joyful Company as we go forward on this day.